Hello and welcome back to Around the Museum with Diane and Joe, where today we are dealing with not the rock hard things, but the soft squidgy stuff.
We've got soft squashy stuff today.
But we're still sort of keeping in the general theme of dinosaurs, although we will be going outside of the realm of dinosaurs with this discussion, because we're looking at stuff that is, well, we refer to it as layman's term soft tissue, but the technical term is original biomolecules in ancient bone. That's really the technical term that you'll find in the scientific literature. But going back to the soft tissue stuff, Diane, what are we talking about when we're using the term soft tissue?
Well, what we mean is the tissue that's around our bones that makes up the rest of the body, so that when we look at our skeleton, that's only a small part of our body. The rest of it is made up of tendons and muscles and fibres and internal organs and all sorts of things like that. So that's where we're going into.
Bones themselves are made up of stuff that we would refer to as inorganic, stuff like calcium and so on and so forth. Yes. But bones do have organic components in them, don't they?
Oh, a lot. Bones are not just as dry as a bone, as the old saying goes. There's actually a lot of biological stuff in bones. Bone is actually a very dynamic tissue. It's got living cells in it when you are alive, and those cells are still there when the animal dies or a person dies. They eventually degenerate. And even between those cells, you've got lots of fibrous material and gluey sort of stuff, which is organic. It's been made by those cells. So that is original organic biomolecules, biological molecules.
So soft tissue is then referring to this organic biomolecules, this biological squidgy stuff, which is found inside bones. So when we're dealing with palaeobiochemistry or paleobiology, we're looking at this organic soft squidgy stuff. We're looking at the chemistry of it, the makeup of it, the presence of these in really old bones, or they're supposed to be really old, and obviously we have debates over how old they are. We don't believe that they really are millions of years old. But let's just talk about how this soft squidgy stuff gets preserved for a moment, because we spoke yesterday, Diane, about this teddy bear here. Just remind us, what's the process that preserved this teddy bear?
Yes, this is a teddy bear that's been permineralized. So it is now full of minerals, and it's literally hard as a rock, but it started out as a soft teddy bear, like you would buy in any toy shop. And what's happened is that water containing dissolved minerals has permeated, so that's where we get permineralized, and the minerals have stayed behind, and so they are now hard, like any other sort of minerals that you might find in a rock.
So minerals have permeated the soft, porous part of the teddy bear, and we spoke yesterday that this is the same process that preserves our bones, particularly things like dinosaur bones. Bone, as we said, is full of very porous material. You can see all the porous material in this bone that has been infilled with mineral. The sort of beigey stuff is the mineral, because it matches the big rock that it's buried
outside,
in. But the black stuff is the actual bone itself. So the bone from the dinosaur is still there. Now, if this has been permeated with minerals, just like the teddy bear has been permeated with minerals, we made the point that permineralization is everything to do with a process. Doesn't require millions of years. But what we're going to do now is we're going to take teddy bear and we're going to cut him in half, which I know sounds a little drastic, but that's all right, because we've done a pre-one here. You don't have to view that on camera. We've actually previously done it with one of our teddy bears here. Here we have our teddy bear, right? And again, this is from the same location, Mother Shipton's Cave in Yorkshire. It's permineralized, it's nice and hard, it's been permeated with minerals, but when we cut teddy bear open, you can see he hasn't actually been fully permeated with minerals. There's still soft tissue inside, quite literally.
Yes, literally soft.
Stuff and fluff, right?
Yes.
So the minerals, although they have begun to permeate the teddy bear, the porous teddy bear, they haven't permeated all the way through. And so you're left with some of this you could call original stuffing,
Yes, that's right.
which is still there. Now, can we correlate what's going on with this teddy bear, this process, with what goes on with the dinosaur bones?
Yes, because what has happened is that the minerals have filled up all of the spaces.
Yeah.
that were there. If you were to look at the fabric that the teddy bear is made of under a microscope, it's full of holes. So the minerals have filled in the holes, and if you look at bone under a microscope, it's also full of holes. So the minerals have actually filled up the holes. They have not actually replaced them. So the substance that was there, which includes the biomolecules, things like proteins, is still there.
Yeah. So when we're dealing with then this question of soft tissue inside dinosaur bones, we're dealing with soft, squidgy stuff that is a big part of the makeup of bones, these proteins, which is a big part of the makeup of these bones, which has been entrapped in minerals and preserved in the bone. And so we're able to then extract it and look at it. So let's talk about some of the techniques that are used to extracting this DNA, because it was a lady called Mary Schweitzer who first really brought this to prominence. It was a while before that. In fact, it was in 1916 that the first sort of suggestion of original soft parts being preserved was first sort of discovered by Barnum Brown, who found these very soft skin impressions and stuff. But it wasn't until 1993 that Mary Schweitzer first published the piece of information on finding red blood cells. So how did that story come about? How did she find this stuff?
Well, if you dissolve away the minerals, and you can, because they were originally dissolved in water, in fluid, so it is possible to redissolve them. And if you do that very carefully, you will leave behind whatever else is there. So that will include proteins and organic structures. Now, bones, as well as having bone cells and the bone substance, the proteins that actually make up the bone substance, they have blood vessels flowing through them. In fact, lots and lots of them. If any of you have ever had a broken bone, you know, you get this massive bruise.
Yes.
And that's actually blood that comes out of the bone. So bone has a big blood supply. There's a whole meshwork of blood vessels within the bone. So if you are carefully able to dissolve away the minerals, what is left will be the bone substance, the proteins and other stuff that makes up the substance of the bones, plus these blood vessels.
So the key thing is about then effectively trying to turn this fossilized piece of bone, this permineralized piece of bone, back into its more natural state, its demineralized state, so that you're then able to see what soft tissue is left. And Mary Schweitzer, as you said, found the red blood cells predominantly. And a lot of people didn't believe her. A lot of people didn't want to believe her. And before we go on to talk about techniques and some of the new stuff that's been found, because there's now been over 200 published pieces of scientific literature which refer to soft tissue, original biomolecules inside ancient bone. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But why is there this contention? Why do some people not want to find or not like the idea of finding original biomolecules inside ancient bones that are supposed to be millions of years old?
Well, biological molecules do actually degrade over time, and they don't last millions of years, and they don't even last thousands of years. If anything, they would last hundreds, some of them, the really tough fibrous ones, possibly thousands of years. And we know that from ancient burial sites where there are sort of some remains of bits of hair and sinews and things like that, where we know when these were buried. But no one believes that biomolecules could last for millions of years, because we know how they're made. They're made out of lots of strings of small molecules glued together or stuck together by chemical bonds. But left to themselves, those chemical bonds will fall apart. That's what molecules do if they're left on their own. So if you're talking about millions of years, now in the case of dinosaurs, you're talking, what, 60, 70, 100 million years. No one believed that biomolecules could last that long. So when the evidence was found that they were there, you had a very big mismatch between what we believe about how old dinosaurs are and how old these bones might be.
Yeah. So we're dealing with an issue then between the purported ages of the bones and what we're finding inside of them. In fact, we're quite heavily involved in this research at Creation Research, and we're doing a lot of different tests, which we'll talk about in a moment.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest critics of not just our work in soft tissue, but also everybody who's doing this work in soft tissue, Schweitzer and the like, one of the biggest critics is a guy called Buckley from Manchester University, and he's an expert in ancient collagen remains. And collagen is, well, what is collagen, Diane?
Well, collagen is what literally holds you together. It's a fibrous protein. It's found in skin. It's found around your internal organs. It's found around your muscles. So it literally is the sort of sheeting that and fibers that hold you together. Your tendons and ligaments are made out of collagen. And it's also the protein substance that makes up bone. Bone is organic stuff and fibrous stuff. It's a bit like fiberglass, right? Where you have resin, which is glassy and hard, so it's hard and brittle, and you have fibrous stuff, which is very, very strong and resists being torn apart, but it's flexible, it bends. Yeah. You put those two things together, and you end up with a substance which is a composite substance. And lots of biomolecules and biological structures are composites. So we take the best of the properties of each of those. So you end up with something that is hard, holds its own shape, but it has a little bit of flexibility and resistance to being torn apart.
But it is a protein. It is
but collagen is a protein, so it's made up of a whole lot of little molecules all strung together. So it's pretty tough protein, but eventually it will fall apart. Those small molecules will just split open.
So you have collagen, a principal component of bone, which is a protein. It's an organic substance. It's a very tough protein, one of the toughest and strongest, but it is still an organic component. And so it will break down over time, and we are finding collagen inside very, very ancient bones that are supposed to be over millions of years old. And it's Buckley who's an ancient collagen expert, and his quote is that in less than 1 million years there should be less than 1% chance of less than 1% collagen left inside bones. In other words, if you want it simplified, 1 million years is your maximum before there should be no collagen left inside bones whatsoever. And yet we're testing bones that are up to 200 million years old, and they're, or supposedly, and they still have soft tissue inside of them. So it is a big problem if we want to believe that these bones really are millions of years old.
Yes, indeed. So there's a big mismatch between the story that's being told about these fossils and what we're actually finding with modern scientific processes or modern scientific techniques for examining bones. And so that means people are going to be challenged. What do we really believe about these bones? What is their real origin?
So Mary Schweitzer then started off with effectively optical techniques. So you demineralize the bone, that's getting rid of the minerals, you're left with whatever is organic inside of it. Yes. And then you basically look at it under microscopes, right? Which is a perfectly good way of doing it, but it's a moderately simple way of doing it. But since this discovery in 1993, particularly since 2016, there has been an enormous amount of development in this kind of research and the techniques which are being used, particularly using techniques which are known techniques in the medical and the scientific and forensic world, and then applying them to this kind of new research. So things like mass spectrometry, mass spectroscopy, and also things like your more detailed microscopy, so things like scanning electron microscopes and the like, which can identify stuff. So if we just go over here, Diane, because we've got a nice interesting bone here. It's a dinosaur bone. We spoke about this in our dinosaur program. It's an iguanodon bone, and again you can see, Diane, look, all of the porous material that's been infilled, right? So your beigey stuff is the same as your sort of your matrix, and it's the black stuff is the actual bone. And you can see we've got a hole
Yes.
in the middle here. Now we drilled this hole, and what we did is we drilled a couple of millimeters down, discarded it, because you want to, when you're doing these tests, try and get rid of any chance of contamination, and we'll speak about that in a moment. But we drilled down even deeper, took out the powdered bone that came from the drill, right? So you've now got a powdered mix of the bone, the minerals, and anything that's organic that's left inside. So then what you do is you put it through this digestion process we spoke about earlier, right? Using an acid to demineralize and digest and denature the bone. And then eventually you end up with a solution. And the solution will have anything that's organic in the bone left in it, because everything that's inorganic, all the minerals, have been digested and destroyed. What you then do is you then put that sample through what's known as a mass spectrometer. Now, this is something that, in a very simple terms, it uses a form of light and a receiver or receptor in order to identify different masses. And you can think about masses as the kind of the amount of something there is, right? If you think about your periodic table of elements, right, you know you've got all those funny little names and little letters, but then at the top there's a little number, and that number is the atomic number, which tells you how much mass, how much of something is in that particular atom or element. And so if you have a very complex element like collagen, then it'll show up on your mass spectrometer in little spikes. So it sort of tells you what's inside. Now, we have found collagen inside this iguanodon bone using a technique known as liquid chromatography mass spectrometry, and so collagen is present here, and that really is a problem if you want to believe that this bone is, as scientists purport it to be, 125 million years old. Really is a big problem.
Yes, that is a serious problem. There should be no collagen left if it really was that old.
Yeah. Now, just to say, Diane, just explain what this is, because we've spoken a lot about dinosaurs, and we'll talk about the implications of all this a bit more in a moment. But just explain what this fossil is, Diane, because I know that you and John have done some research on a very similar fossil to this.
Yes, this is a squid, and you can see here are its tentacles lying behind it. Now here we have this dark patch here. Now, if you know anything about squid, they're famous for jet propulsion, and they're famous for ink. You may have heard of squid ink. In fact, it's used in cooking these days. But squid ink literally is ink. It's a black liquid, and you can write with it. And a few years ago, when we were doing our normal watching brief on the scientific news, we came across a report where someone had found a similar fossil to this, and a squid with its ink sac intact, and they thought, well, that's clever. Let's see if we can dissolve some of that and literally use it as ink. And they did it. And when I told John Mackay about this, he said, oh, well, I've got one of those. Let's see if we can do the same thing. Now, that's good scientific method. Someone reports, this is what I found, this is what I did.
You're testing it, yeah.
So we put it to the test. So we did exactly the same thing. We got out the fossil, dissolved the ink sac or the ink, and we were actually able to write a word. So we now had a fossil word. And I dare say we could probably do the same with this fossil, though it's a little bit smaller than the one that we found. But the point is, the ink is made up of an organic molecule which we're very familiar with. It's melanin. It's a small molecule compared with the big molecules that make up collagen and other fibrous tissue. But it breaks down. In fact, if you keep it in a bottle, you have to keep it in a cool, dark place, like you keep any sort of things that you're going to use in cooking. So it does break down. Now, squid, I don't know, how old is this fossil meant to be?
This fossil is meant to be, this is from the Solnhofen in Germany, it's Jurassic. Right. It'll be the same one as your ones in Australia. So it's supposed to be around 159 million years old.
Yes. Yes.
So pretty old for having soft tissue still
For
left
still
inside
having
of it,
soft
still
tissue
ink.
and still having intact ink inside it. Yes.
So this soft tissue then goes beyond just your dinosaur bones, which is
Oh,
obviously
yes.
most famous because people love dinosaurs. So it goes beyond the dinosaur bones, it goes into other creatures like squid as well. We've tested in creatures like the palaeontological,
Yes.
which is a sort of a tapir-like creature, which is supposed to be 33 million years old. And we get a nice sort of gradient going backwards. But Diane, can people find out more about the squid research?
Yes, we've written up this little story ourselves. You can find it on our website, on our fact file website, and just look for fossil ink and you'll find our little article with photos of what we actually did called Fossil Ink Should Make You Think.
So there you go. You can go and find that on the fact file and you go to creationresearch.net and it'll be there. All right, let's just talk about one last thing then, Diane, about some of the implications of this, because when we're doing this research, and like I say, there's now nearly 200 papers on scientifically published papers of soft tissue. Okay, so it's big, it's widespread. You're really left with three conclusions, and your three conclusions are as follows: either the fossil soft tissue preserved original biomolecules that we're finding. And by the way, as distinction, because people sometimes get confused about this, when we talk about soft tissue and we are really referring to original biomolecules, we're talking about those original biological materials that is inside the bone. Now, soft tissue can also refer to things like preserved soft tissue, like skin impressions and stomach contents and stuff like that. And that is a good piece of evidence of rapid burial, but you don't always have original biomolecules left in it. When we talk about soft tissue, we're talking about original biomolecules, soft, squidgy stuff, bits of biology that are preserved inside the bone. And even by secular standards, the oldest these soft tissue parts could be is 1 million years old. And in fact, I believe it's actually quite a bit younger than that, given what we do, because you look at some of the half-lives of collagen and it really doesn't last that long. But when we're dealing with this, we're left with three options. Number one, what we are finding is contamination. In other words, what we're finding is not the original biomolecules from the bone, but it's contamination like bacteria, films, and so on and so forth. Or soft tissue can survive for much, much, much longer than we currently understand it to be able to do so. Or the bones that we're finding this soft tissue in are not as old as claimed. Now, we'll talk about the contamination in a moment, but out of the two that are left, the soft tissue lasting for longer than we think, or the bones being younger than we think, which of those two are we able to do scientific tests on to research and find out and do repeatable tests on about?
Well, we have biomolecules that exist today, so we can actually test those for how long they last. So we can look at the actual chemistry and we can get the expertise of biochemists who have been studying these things for centuries. So we have the records of biochemists who have been studying proteins and various other molecules for a long time. We can get known quantities of real biomolecules from the real world and actually see how long the chemistry takes for bonds to break, chemical bonds to break down, so we can test them.
Okay, so out of those two options, out of the biomolecules being able to last for longer than we understand, or the bones not being as old as they're purported to be, one of those is testable, and every way we test it, it comes back as these biomolecules cannot be more than 1 million years old. So that is doing good science, that's doing real science. So out of those two options, the option we have to scientifically come to, the conclusion that we have to scientifically come to is that these bones are not as old as purported to be. If we are finding original biomaterial in them, then the bones cannot be millions of years old. So let's talk about this contamination factor, because that's the real big question. Right? Is this contamination? Are we really finding soft tissue from that creature? And lots of people have argued about this over the years. It's been a very, very controversial issue, particularly for poor Mary Schweitzer, who was battered over it. And there's no way it could possibly be that. And she spent the last 30 years really trying to prove that what she's found is real. And for years, it was just her doing the research and her team. But as I said, in the last few years, particularly since 2016, which is when the first ever proteins were found, collagen was found inside these dinosaur bones, it now goes way beyond just Schweitzer's research. We have multiple researchers from multiple institutions doing multiple tests, not just looking down a microscope, but now doing known medical techniques, things like second harmonic generation imaging, things like mass spectrometry, and inside mass spectrometry, there's lots of different methods, including liquid chromatography mass spectrometry, which we've done here, mass spectroscopy like FTIR, Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, and so many different techniques that are known medical techniques that are being used. And these are well-established principles that we use in medicine all the time. So the chances of them being wrong is really very, very low because we use them practically in experimental medicine and biomedical research all the time. So you're now starting to build a picture. Lots and lots of people doing lots and lots of different tests, and they're finding the same things. And so now we ask the question, well, where are they finding them? Because could it be that it's just one location that's preserving this? Well, that's one of the arguments that was used because it was all from the same location in the USA when Schweitzer was doing her research. But now we've found this soft tissue is preserved throughout the world. So it's geographically extensive. And then you say, well, maybe is it just the one layer? Because it was all from the Cretaceous at first, right? Well, now we're starting to get a real big pattern of soft tissue being preserved, original biomolecules being preserved in fossils all the way up and down the geological column, as far low as the Ediacaran, which is some of the lowest forms of rocks, right?
Down the very bottom.
All the way up to the top. And we found them evenly distributed throughout the geological column. So really, scientifically, what are the chances of all of these reports, all of these methods, all of these researchers, what is the chance of all of them being contamination?
Well, it's zero.
Basically.
It's zero with that sort of cross-check, the amount of cross-checking we've got in terms of location and in terms of actual technique. And as you said, these were well-established techniques before anyone started to apply them to fossil bones. So no one disputes the actual methods.
So even aside from our creationist beliefs and aside from our biblical beliefs, purely from a scientific point of view, from an observational understanding of science, we can come to a reasonable, logical and truthful conclusion that these bones are not millions of years old.
We certainly can.
Well, there we are. Fascinating stuff. And this is why it's so important to do this kind of research, as the Bible says, to test all things and hold fast to what is true. And we know that the psalmist says in Psalm 119, verse 160, God's word is true from the very beginning, and we can praise the Lord from that. Yes. Now, if you want to follow the research that we're doing, you can go to creationresearch.net, click on the research. You'll find a whole host of information. You can also follow the fact file and sign up to the newsletters and join us for Creation Conversations every week where we deal with new topics on our podcast. But be sure to join us next week as we carry on going around the museum with Joe and Diane. God bless, guys. Got questions? We've got answers. Check out askjohnmackay.com to see Q&A articles by experts from around the world. See also the creationfactfile.com website for latest evidence news from creation research. Be sure to join us for Creation Conversations, a weekly live broadcast with the whole creation research team dealing with different topics from creation, evolution and the Bible. Check out Creation Research Live, our all-new streaming service for creation research, with thousands of free resources and access to all of Creation Research's premium documentaries, debates and presentations through a low-cost monthly subscription. Find out more at creationresearch.live. Watch Creation Research TV, a live 24/7 broadcast of everything creation research. Available for free on our YouTube channel and through Creation Research Live.